Hey friends, today's video is all about onions. It's time to harvest my first group of onions, and so I thought I'd show you how I harvest them, how I store them, or prep them for storage anyway, and then talk to you a little bit about how to grow them and how they work. The first thing you need to know about onions before you grow them is that there are three major classifications. There are either long day onions, intermediate day onions, or short day onions. And what that means, what it refers to, is how many hours of daylight in a day it takes before the onion starts bulbing. So unlike a lot of plants, onions are not set to ripen by a certain specific number of days that they've been planted. Instead, they're set to ripen by the number of hours of daylight that happen in a day. So if you think back to those three classifications, long day, intermediate, and short day, what happens is short day onions require 10 to 12 hours of daylight to start bulbing. Intermediate day onions require 12 to 14, and long day onions require 14 to 16 hours of daylight to start to ripen or begin what they call the bulbing process, which is the plant takes energy from its leaves in the form of carbohydrates and stores them down in the lower parts of the leaves that swell and get bigger, and that's what creates the bulb. So the key thing here is that you have to plant your onions soon enough in the year for your area that they can get a lot of leaves that are big and healthy, so that when day length reaches that critical time frame, that's 10 to 12 for short day onions, 12 to 14 for intermediate, and 14 to 16 for long day, once it reaches that critical number of hours, then the plant starts bulbing. So for those of us that live in the central US, the latitude that runs along the central US, we do really well with intermediate day onions because we can get our onions in the ground soon enough in the spring that they create a lot of leaves before day length reaches that 12 to 14. If I live in a northern state, I want to get my onions in the ground soon enough that they can produce enough leaves that when day length reaches 14 to 16 hours, they can produce a pretty good bulb. Southern states generally grow short day onions because they're going to they have enough time in the early spring to get their plants out and get enough leaves on them before day length reaches 10 to 12. So that's the biggest key, the biggest thing you need to know. It's all about number of leaves, and it's all about getting them in the ground soon enough in the spring to give you enough leaves to give you good bulbs. If you plant them later, you'll get less leaves, and so you have teeny tiny little piddly bulbs. But if you get them in soon enough and you plant the right variety for your latitude, then you should get really good large-sized onions. And I will note that I buy my starts each year from a company out of Texas called Dixondale Farms. I'll put a link in the description for everyone. I order them early in the winter to make sure that I get the ones that I want. And I plant two varieties. I plant Candy for my intermediate day onions that don't store as long but are really sweet and give you a really large bulb. And then I plant Copra, which are my long day onions, which are more pungent and harder, and they store a lot longer. We'll get, gosh, sometimes 10, 11 months of storage out of them. I think my parents still have some in their garage that we're eating on. So with that, let's go out to the garden and I'll talk to you about how I'm gonna harvest them and how I'll store them. So here we are, intermediate day onions, which means that when day length hit 12 to 14 hours, they started to bulb. That was sometime mid part of June for my latitude. Once they're done bulbing, the tops start to fall over on their own. When about most of them have fallen over, I'll come out here and push the rest over, and that tells the plant to enter dormancy. I cut the water at that point in time as well, and they've been sitting out here now for almost 2 weeks, and they are ready to harvest. And look at those bulbs. Really nice. Really happy with how they turned out. So we're gonna dig them up, and then we'll set them in my garage where they can be protected from the direct sunlight so they can dry out a little bit further. Then I'll cut the tops, cut any remaining roots, and then they'll be good to store. These ones only last a couple of months in storage, so these will be the first ones that we use. The other variety that I was telling you about that I grow is called Copra, and this is a long day onion, so as you can see, they're a little bit behind the intermediate day onions. They started their bulbing process a little bit later in June, and they're now just starting to topple over. I've got about a third of them have fallen over on their own, so I'm going to give them a handful of days, maybe a week further, and then I'll come in here and I'll push them all over, cut the water to them, And then in a couple of weeks I can come out and pull those and put them into storage. What I was telling you about number of leaves, you can see that really well here. So what we were trying to do is get these guys in the ground early enough in spring. I put mine in around first part of April, end of March, so that we can push a lot of leaf growth. If you look at this guy, we have a leaf down here that's dried up, but if you count them up, we're looking to try and get 12 to 18 leaves before they start bulbing. And that's going to give you really good sized onions and really good quality onions. Another thing to note is sometimes your onions will bolt, meaning that they are going to try and blossom. And when that happens, it's okay. I have a couple in this batch that did that. You just need to know that once an onion's bolted like that, you can count on the bulb not storing very long. So even though most of these will store for that 9 to 12 months, these couple that bolted, I'm just gonna have to set aside and know that I need to use those first because they won't hold in storage as long as the others. Anyway, so with that, let's go ahead and get the candy onions harvested, and we'll go from there. All right, guys, here we are. And there they are, all ready to be laid out and dried and prepped for storage. I've got all the onions laid out on this pallet. I had a piece of mesh that I found in my garage. The pallet spaces were a little big to stack the onions really well on, so I found this piece of mesh and laid it across there and was able to lay them out. I tried to keep all the leaves together and the bulbs separate. The goal here is give them enough air circulation that in a couple of weeks they'll be dried out. The tops should be completely desiccated and dried. And the necks of the onions, neck meaning this part right here, should be all dried up. It shouldn't slip at all when you rub it between your fingers. That tells you that it's dried enough that it's ready to store. And having them that dry will prevent any bacteria or diseases from getting into the wet part of the bulb. Also, as they dry, they'll brown out. The skins on the exterior will dry out and get harder and brown, and those also protect the inner part of the bulb so that they'll store longer. All right, guys, that's it for harvesting and storing onions. If you have any questions, go ahead and post them in the comments, and I'll answer them as soon as I can. Thanks for watching.